Welcome back to the DK Custom Products channel. We're glad you joined us. My name's Kevin. This is Dwayne. And today's video is to clear up some misunderstandings from previous videos that we've made.
So if you guys have been following us for any amount of time, Kevin and I do a lot of testing, and a lot of that testing is related to engine temperature and how to keep your air-cooled Harley-Davidson cool. And so that's a lot of information to take in. And anytime you put information out there, there's always going to be somebody that has a difference of opinion. And we welcome, differences of opinion. We welcome the conversation. But sometimes those opinions are just categorically false. I understand, if you're watching us, you think these are just our opinions, but a lot of our opinions are based on fact, testing and test results before and after, just clear differences.
We know that the internet is forever.
Yeah.
We're not going to put anything on here that we haven't tested and that we can't back up. Now, if there's some things that are just our opinion, we'll say this is our opinion based on our experience. But when we say something cools the bike down 8 degrees or 15 degrees, that's because we've done dozens, if not hundreds of tests on different bikes verifying how much a particular item cools the bike down.
Correct. And when you put a number to something, like if you say this results in 8 degrees cooler, and it doesn't, this day and age, it gets debunked. I mean, anything we've ever put out there as far as saying a tank lift lowers your engine temperature, if it didn't lower the engine temperature, you'd know it. Yeah. Trust me.
Yeah. So we have this guy who wrote, and I'm not going to read everything he wrote in my whole response to him, but basically on the video we did that we'll put up in the corner here, 10 low cost to no cost ways to cool down your Harley. Mm-hmm. He starts out his comment by saying, forget this video. Install an oil cooler and a fan and you'll get real results. 75% of all heat in any air-cooled motor is taken away by the motor oil. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but really the real answer is in his statement.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll just read you exactly what I wrote him back. What you wrote actually holds the key. You wrote air-cooled motor, not oil-cooled motor. And there is a reason Harley and other companies call their air-cooled engines air-cooled and not oil-cooled. Mm-hmm. Now, the twin-cooled, some of the M8s that are twin-cooled run coolant through their twin cooling, and some of them run oil through the twin cooling, but that's only going around the exhaust valve.
Right. It's not a truly liquid-cooled engine.
Right. So, an air-cooled engine is an air-cooled engine. And yes, oil coolers are very important. We have a video we did that we'll put up in the corner that talks about the two things that we measure. Oil temperature, engine temperature. They're two different measurements. One's taking the temperature of the oil at the dipstick, and the other's taking the temperature of the engine at the cylinder head temperature sensor. And so there are two different things.
And, we're big proponents of an oil cooler. That oil needs a way to shed the heat, especially if it's one of these water-cooled models, as Harley calls it. It does not even come with an oil cooler. Absolutely, you need to add an oil cooler. But, you can add an oil cooler to a bike and see almost no difference in the engine temperature readout. And that engine temp readout dictates timing, dictates fuel management. That's whenever you start to lose power, whenever the bike makes an effort to cool itself down. No matter how many oil coolers you have, that'll take place.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that the heat does not originate in the oil. The heat originates in the engine. Right. And then the oil absorbs some of that heat. And then if there's an oil cooler, the oil can shed some of that heat. But if you've not done anything to cool down the actual engine, it's going to keep heating up that oil. Right. And it's absolutely, like Dwayne said, important to have an oil cooler. If you're seeing your oil temperatures go above 230 degrees. But let's say that your oil temperature is going to 250, you put an oil cooler on there, and now it's hanging out around 220. Your engine temperature is likely to be the same.
Right. And keep in mind, the first degree of heat damage is in your cylinders. I got bad news for you if you think your engine cylinders are oil cooled. You know, you can add an oil cooler. It's not going to do anything for the engine cylinders getting out of round. You know, your bike failing. You can add 5 oil coolers and still fail a leak down test.
No oil jackets in the cylinders or in the heads other than on the twin cooled.
Yeah.
Where it goes around the exhaust valve.
And we don't make this video to clap back at anybody by any means, but we understand that if this guy had that opinion, which is, you know, leaning toward the side of absolutely incorrect, we know others may have that opinion, and you're not doing yourself, you're doing yourself a disservice if you believe an oil cooler is the end all be all to cooling down your Harley.
And one thing we were discussing before we started doing this video, and that is when twin cool bikes first came out, I got one, and I'm going, this oil temperature is out of control. It's because there's no oil cooler on it.
No.
Almost all Harleys, especially baggers and trikes, have an oil cooler. Well, when they put the water pump on there for the coolant to go around the exhaust valves, they didn't put an oil cooler on there. So we said, we got to put an oil cooler on here.
Yeah.
And we did. We put an oil cooler on there and we tested it. And the oil was 10 to 20 degrees cooler. The engine was hotter.
That's right.
And we're going, how is the engine hotter when the oil cooler is cooling down the oil? How is it hotter? Well, we'll put up a picture. There's a bracket that comes off the down tube that the oil cooler mounts to. And we made a bracket to hold it. And that big by that big was blocking the airflow to the cylinders on the left side of the
Only
engine.
on the left side, and only that much.
And it decreased the oil temperature and increased the engine temperature. Right. And so we put some pretty big size holes in there, and we chamfered them at an angle so that when the air hits that plate, the hole being at a little bit of an angle directs that air onto the cylinder. And then when we started doing testing with that, we still had the same lower oil temperature, but we didn't have the increase in the engine temperature that we did.
Right.
So that goes to show you the oil cooling is useful and important because you don't want your oil going over 230 degrees. But to cool the engine, you have to get air flowing over an air-cooled engine.
Right. And just like the story Kevin just told you, I mean, these aren't ideas we just come up with or opinions we formulated out of thin air. It's based on experiences.
Dozens and hundreds of hours of testing. And I'm not complaining because I get to ride when we're testing.
Right.
But when you ride the same route at the same speed, at the same throttle setting, literally sometimes 100 times to test one item. Well, I'm not going to complain, but you can imagine it's not as interesting the 100th time as it was the first time.
Right. And, I understand we get a little pushback saying, well, of course you guys will say that. You sell the parts that cool the motor down. You have the magic potion. But I promise you, for every one part you see on our website that we've come up with, there are dozens that are in the trash.
Oh, yeah.
That we could have easily said, this will lower your temperature 10, and they just don't. So we don't publish them. We don't use them. We don't, we don't say this will help when it doesn't help.
Yeah. The only parts on our website are parts we run on our own bikes because we've tested them and we see that there's a benefit to them.
That's right.
That simple. We have most of our heat testing report results in one report. And we'll put the link up in the corner and we'll put it down in the description. But we'll just look at a few of these right now. So when you remove the fork fangs, if you have fork fangs, you can see how much that lowers the engine temperature. When you remove the umbrella baffle, that lowers temperature. When you add a tank lift, that lowers temperature. When you add cooling deflector wings, that lowers temperature. These are all things that are getting more airflow to the engine. Right. When you add like a Jim's force flow fan to it, that really reduces the temperature.
And while we're on the subject of fans, one of the things this guy mentioned is installing an oil cooler with the fan, and you'll get real results. The fan's not bad, but, think about how you ride the bike, at what speeds and how you operate this bike. Anything above 30 miles per hour, fan's virtually useless. So below 30 miles per hour, if you're the individual that's in stop and go traffic constantly, all the time, yeah, you'd benefit from a fan.
Absolutely.
But an oil cooler fan is not, again, is not the end all be all of cooling. I mean, it's just not. Now it does help. It does help to supplement the cooling, but again, only under 30 miles per hour. And we're not telling you need all these things. So when you follow that link that Kevin mentioned with our testing results, we recommend that you collect data on your bike first and foremost and see what you need. You know what I mean? Yeah, those fork fangs are terrible for engine temperature. But if you've taken multiple measures at lowering that engine temperature, you can sacrifice a little and throw them fork fangs on there, cut out that buffeting. But I mean, we, in that report, we detail the threshold of what is too hot. For example, on these M8s, if your ET gets to 270 degrees, it starts to back off timing, it starts to lower your performance in an effort to cool it down. So to me, that's the threshold. Do not get over 270. Do what it takes to keep your bike under 270 and see that it never exceeds that.
And that's on an M8.
On an M8, yeah.
Twin cam's 230.
Right.
Yeah. Like Dwayne said, most people do not have to do everything on the list, but we actually did a video on the common sense approach to lowering temperatures, which we put up in the corner here, where we show you what we do and what makes the most sense to do when you go about getting your engine to the optimum operating temperatures so that it'll have the most power and so it will last the longest.
We've recently had a rash of new subscribers recently, and a lot of them aren't aware that we have an extensive history of doing these tests. So sometimes we'll make a statement and they'll say something that's opposite of that, rather than just asking, where did you come up with this? So, my tip for you guys that are new, if you have a question about any statement we make in the future, chances are we have a past video that shows the testing and the results and how we drew that conclusion.
Or maybe a report on a reports page of our website.
Right.
Yeah.
We have multiple reports on the website. We're upwards of 800 or 900 videos on our YouTube channel at this point, and many of which are clear cut, showing the before and after with test results.
Showing the bike on the dyno.
Right.
Showing the bike going down the road, being measured at certain spots at certain miles per hour. It's easy, really, really easy, because the dealerships are saying one thing, this mechanic saying another thing, this friend saying another thing.
And then after the fact that every model bike doesn't need the same thing. You know what I mean?
And every rider, we just did videos the other day with John, and we're going, what do you need heated gear for in August? And he says, I've been in 0 degree temperature in August. And it reminded me, Mary and I rode through a snowstorm in August in Wyoming, going over a mountain pass.
Yeah.
So everybody rides in different conditions, so they have different needs. Right.
And these bikes, to the rest of the world, people outside the Harley community, they see these bikes as cookie cutter. They don't know the difference between a Road King, and a Dyna Wide Glide. But to us, those of us that, obviously know the difference in the models. Some bikes need an oil cooler. Some of them can do without one. And, some of them need an electric fan. Some of them may not. The water-cooled models absolutely need an oil cooler. If there's any Harley out there that needs an oil cooler, it's those water-cooled Ultras, without a doubt. If you have questions about what would make your particular bike run more efficiently, run cooler, last longer, run better overall, you can always shoot us an email to support@dkcustomproducts.com. You can leave us a comment below, just like this gentleman left a comment. We love comments, even if you disagree. We're always up for the discussion. But if you have any questions at all, do not hesitate to leave us a comment, shoot us an email, or give us a call, 662-252-8828. We have an entire customer service team ready to help you out.
Y'all ride safe out there.